Hey, welcome to HWL Talks, the podcast about healthcare workforce and everything that goes into healthcare. I'm your host, Tommy Benner. Today, we're here to discuss the state of nursing workforce, in particular, how healthcare approaches that contingent nursing workforce, such an important area of our healthcare lives. The pressing challenges in healthcare staffing, turnover, burnout, financial pressures, that's the stuff we're here to discuss today. And we want to keep the conversation around the contingent workforce strategy and why there needs to be a shift from the reactive crisis management to making it a key pillar of the total workforce contingent plan. Today we have Amanda Wheeler. She's our VP of InSourcing here at HWL. Amanda is a fourth generation nurse, so she's a nurse by birth. She's a healthcare executive by training and a healthcare leader by experience. We're really excited to have her and looking forward to the conversation. Amanda, welcome to HWL Talks. Nice to have you.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. We're getting Amanda off a well-deserved vacation and also a recently published AONL podcast where she talks about a lot of the similar things that we're going to talk about today. So really excited to talk to Amanda. Amanda, want to go give yourself a little introduction and then we can jump right into it.
Sure. So like Tommy said, I'm the VP of InSourcing at HWL. And prior to that, I spent about 15, 20 years inside of healthcare organizations working with the leaders both at the front line and at the executive level, working on workforce optimization strategy, which is just a big fancy title for just looking at workforce through different ways and means and lenses and trying to figure out a way to build bridges between, what healthcare systems need to be able to run the business, but what the workforce needs and what they're demanding from an employer in terms of work-life balance, protection against workplace violence, all of the things that you're hearing, and this is nothing new or, nothing that any healthcare organization is experiencing right now, but those are the things that, we focused on, and we did it, with the collaboration from, everyone and built bridges around, how do we accomplish both? Because there's a lot of folks out there and a lot of philosophies that say you can't, and we found that you really can. So that's been the background of my work. Prior to that, I was a cardiac nurse, PVICU in particular. I spent a lot of time helping build those types of programs inside of healthcare organizations. We built, mechanical circulatory support programs. We built transplant programs. And so that was a lot of fun. And that was how I wound up in healthcare administration was, the build of those programs, which led to the management of the workforce and the people. And that just kind of grew from there. So happy to be here. Happy to share whatever insights I can.
Awesome. Amanda, I knew this about you. I knew you came from a nursing family, 4 generations of nursing. That's pretty impressive. Give me some intel. You've got a lot of past behind you, a lot of knowledge gained over the years. Give me a little bit of intel. What are the Amanda's mom, grandmother, great grandmother? Like what are their thoughts on everything? Where do they see things today?
It's funny. My mother is, she jokes all the time that she's so dedicated to the profession of nursing that she birthed one. So, that's always been kind of the ongoing joke. And the background and generations behind that have been not just my mom, but it wasn't my grandmother. It was my great aunt and my great grandmother. And they, were in that world where it was on the job training and diploma nursing before it was, this profession that it has become. And, the truth still, I think, that transcends all generations, regardless of how we were trained, what practice, we focused on or what specialty we were, is that it's about the people. And, I hear a lot of organizations say it's about the patients first and, the healthcare providers always. And I think that's true. But as I evolve and kind of, build my own sub philosophies, I tend to shift that a little bit. And, while patient, care is front and center always, my passion has become focusing on the workforce, because if you take care of the workforce, they're going to take care of your patients. And so you can accomplish it that way. So I think that that's where we all kind of align and really, come together around those kinds of conversations. So it's fun at the dinner table with a bunch of nurses. And then, the other side is firemen and police officers. So we're all service industry oriented for sure.
Yeah. Well, golly, appreciate all that your family's doing. It sounds like we're lucky to have you guys around. From the standpoint of being in nursing for so long, and you've kind of had this career that's spanned a lot of different roles, and I feel like you've kind of just plugged and played everywhere you've gone along, and that's great. What do you think we're doing right, and what do you think we're doing wrong from a healthcare scenario? Because it feels, just as somebody who's in it but not a nurse, and it just feels like there's this, I don't know, it doesn't feel like there's this cohesion around nurse like it used to be. But I'd love to get your, what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? And I think we can, as the conversation goes, we're gonna give some thoughts and solutions on it. But I just kind of want to understand from you where you think we are today, and get your opinions on it.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and it's one that I think you're going to get a different answer no matter who you ask. And the best I can do is just represent what I think and what my experiences have brought through.
For sure.
And that is that, gosh, it's the things we're doing right is that we are acknowledging that, I think, especially in the last couple of years post-pandemic, we're acknowledging that the way that we've been doing things for a lot of years maybe isn't working. And, there's a lot of conversation going on that I don't know that I've ever seen or heard before, or have heard less of before, that is really becoming, front and center and top of mind for everyone. Not to say that it wasn't to a certain extent, but I feel like that this has just become one of those conversations that it's there and present always, and it's at the center of everything we do. So I think that's really great, considering that, we really have to focus on a couple of things, first of which is, that reactive approach that you mentioned in the intro. A lot of, the way that workforce strategy went before the pandemic was, you went straight to that travel nurse market, because, you could, and you didn't use enough of it to where it really kind of puts you over a barrel, so to speak, financially. But then, the pandemic changed all of that. So, there's a lot of to be said for, the fact that healthcare organizations, now that things have kind of calmed back down to a certain extent, and I say that sort of tongue in cheek, from a pandemic perspective, that people are still focusing on this, and they're looking for ways to get more proactive and to ensure that they never get into those situations again. And the ways that they're doing it is through building flexible models for staff and doing better jobs of meeting staff where they need to be in their work-life balance. And, that's a big, sort of catchphrase or hot button word, whatever you want to call it. But, I think that healthcare organizations are really taking it to heart that there needs to be this balance between, the agility of the workforce and being able to, drop in and plug and play a nurse where you need to take care of a patient, and the flexibility that, someone in the healthcare, sector needs in terms of the way that they want to work and interact with an employer. And, gaining better understanding of just how workforce moves in general, and being able to respond to that variability from a volume perspective. What we're doing wrong, I still think we could do a better job in addressing burnout. There's a lot of focus right now on the workplace violence issues that are going on. And then, ultimately retention, and that is getting so much better. So it's sort of a double-edged sword, but, you got to always have your eye on the prize. There's not really a fix or a one and done solution for that. That's something that you just always have to focus on forever. It has to be just part of the fabric of how you interact with your workforce. So, I think those are some of the things that I focus on, is that, schedule and flexibility, making sure that the workforce feels valued, catching burnout early, and really getting proactive with your strategic workforce plan and how you leverage an internal contingent workforce model as sort of your internal bench strength that you go to before you have to go to those travel nursing worlds, so that you have layers of support before you get to that place where you're spending, millions of dollars to backfill, turnover when you have it, because you're going to have it. It's going to happen. And you're going to run a certain amount of vacancy in your workforce at any given time. So, the organizations that I see flourishing are the ones that understand that, are planning for it, and are building that internal resource pool or that internal flexible workforce model that they go to first before they go to the travel nursing industry.
Yeah. I had a column of questions that are, in my interview prep that was dumb questions. So just, here, this is one of them. So just prepare yourself. I hear it. I know what it is. I have a feeling. I've never felt it to the degree that other people have, or nurses especially, are feeling it. Could you give us like a download on like what is burnout? This is not a nursing podcast, right? So it's not, not everybody here is a nurse or understands nursing. What is this burnout and what does it look like? Like, how is it manifesting itself in our healthcare delivery system these days? And just like, where is it coming from? So I'm going to preface it by saying, I know it sounds like a dumb question. I feel like there are people who could benefit by understanding kind of what it is and why it is, and then maybe that'll inform us a little bit more on a solution to it.
Yeah, I think, again, it just kind of goes back to, you ask that question to, 5 nurses, you're going to get 5 different answers. But from right. From my seat, I see it as when you get to that place as a nurse where there's just a general dread to go in to take care of patients, because, a lot of nurses, and, it sounds trite, but it's true. A lot of nurses out there see it not just as, a profession or a job, but it's a bit of a calling for us, and we're compelled to do it. And so when you get to a place where something you love that much, you just kind of, you look for ways out of it. That's a sign you're already deep in burnout. And so I think that, that's the place and space where we as a healthcare organization have got to provide the tools and resources to help the workforce, I think, reflect and mirror it in their own thought processes of where is that happening, and how do I catch it before it does and speak up and ask for help? Number one. And number two, how do we as leaders get better in recognizing it in our people and building the types of relationships with our people that we can see it? Like I kind of, you and I have always connected over sports. The best coaches in the world, the best pitching coaches in the world, know when it's time to take a pitcher out of the game long before the pitcher is ready to come out.
Right.
And I think that, we've got to adopt a little bit of that mindset as nursing leaders. We have to watch our people, and we have to, know when it's time to give them a break. And we have to build infrastructure and ways and means that we can do that. And going back to that, internal contingent workforce, it goes beyond just, letting them take the benefit of their paid time off, or, making them feel better about being able to take a leave of absence, to take care of a loved one. You want them to be able to feel okay to do that. There's a lot of scenarios out there where nurses, they feel guilty in a lot of ways because in doing that, because they're leaving their colleagues, and they're worried that they're going to be short-staffed because of the way the nursing supply and demand market works right now. And right. So I think that that's the bigger focus, and the kind of the bigger thing that goes into some of these internal contingent workforce models is they're really meant to be based as a baseline from an infrastructure perspective on the number of hours that you need to cover your workforce's PTO, to cover their leave of absence, and to cover a modicum of the variability in your patient volumes. And so that gets back into some of the predictive analytics and how you go into strategically building these internal workforce models. It's not just, yes, it's to mitigate overtime. Yes, it's to keep you financially resilient, but the value proposition of this type of a workforce model is that it actually prevents that burnout. I mean, yeah, it'll save you the cost of, $52,000 to $53,000 a year of replacing a bedside nurse when she leaves you because she's burnt out. It's estimated, I think, somewhere in the ballpark of, hospital turnover costs range anywhere from like $6.5 to $10.5 million a year, depending on the hospital size and their turnover rates. And, that's with the average turnover rate for nursing right now hovering around 18 to 22%. Now, it's gone down post-pandemic. It's still great. But, for every 1% decrease in your turnover rate, you could save potentially, $400,000 a year. So I think that, you look at it through that lens of how do you accomplish both the financial side of what it can earn you, in terms of the dollar savings, that needs to be right there married up with the benefit it has for your workforce, because that's sunk cost. If those nurses get burnt out and they're just ready to throw in the towel and they need a break, and there's no other way they can do it but quit or take a leave of absence, and that's something that you have to be mindful of.
Yeah. It's you and I were both at the Becker's big executive panel, and it's kind of, I feel like if the trend you can spot, that's the trend that's gonna be pervasive in the healthcare going forward. And the one that I caught was the desire to talk about retention. And I saw an interesting conversation where they were talking about retention. We got to keep them. The price of losing them, because we're losing the experienced nurses, and then in the back end there's not enough nurses, so you have to lower your, I don't want to say your standard, but you have to where you would have to take 5 years of experience to do this certain kind of nursing. They're saying if you've got a year's worth of experience, we need you in the job now. So what you lose is so significant, because you're losing all of that. All that knowledge just goes out the door with the nurse. It's non-transferable, right? So, then you have to bring in a nurse who's new out of school and doesn't have that experience. It just seems like it's like, from an outsider's healthcare user perspective, it seems kind of scary. Like, when you think about it, does that make sense? Is that a reasonable thought?
It does. I think from someone who's it really, again, it's interesting to hear the perspectives of someone who is a nurse versus someone who isn't a nurse but listening to these issues. And I think you got it right in certain aspects in terms of the experience, right? And I think pulling it back into, okay, so how do we the retention factor there is, I mean, here's the truth is, once I'd say it's somewhere in the ballpark of around 20. Last time I looked at Bureau of Labor Statistics data, there's 20 to 38%, depending on the models that you look at, of the nursing workforce that will, that are going to be part of that silver tsunami and are going to want to retire. So not only do you have the expectation that, in the next few years between now and 2030, that patient volumes are going to increase related to the aging of the baby boomers, but some of those nurses are baby boomers and they're going to want to retire. So you've got this shrinkage of the workforce at a pivotal time where you've got increase in anticipated patient volume need. And so you've got to get intelligent about how you retain some of that experience. And 3 12-hour shifts at the bedside, after, 20, 25 years, 30 years, man, there's nurses and they are hardcore and they can do it. But a lot of them don't want to or don't need to anymore. And so part of thinking about things from that innovative perspective of building flexible models, it also encompasses how do you retain some of that knowledge and some of that wisdom that is part of that nursing workforce that's really experienced, that's going to be looking towards retirement. And it needs to be in a way that they can impart it to new generations coming in. So you gotta think about, okay, how do I build preceptor pools perhaps that I can drop into a group of new grads that consist of some of these more experienced nurses, and that's just what they plug in deployment style for a while, and they they help train these new grads as they're coming out in the fall, and they dedicate a good solid maybe 6 months of work to working with them. But then once you turn those nurses loose and they're off of orientation, hey, maybe those nurses that are really experienced preceptors, they get a couple of months off. And you build models, out of these types of internal resource pools to where, it's not that you're coming into work all, every week for a consistent track, but you're grouping your work, like deployment style, kind of like the military does. So, that's a model that you could think about in deploying in one of these types of things to build that retention of experience and transference of knowledge. I think that the other part of that, though, I have to say, is we're talking about sort of that more experienced generation. What I don't want to discount is Gen Z, because they are perhaps the most service-driven and mission-driven generation I have seen in a long time. They want their work to mean something. They want to feel like they're contributing to something larger than themselves, and they are eager to learn. But what I love about them most is their willingness to set boundaries and self-preserve. And I wish that was something that my generation was probably better at. And I've learned a lot in working with them. So I think that we also have to be very intentional not to push into that space with them to where, you cross a boundary, because they have very little tolerance for it, from a generational perspective. So I think that going into that retention space, you have to be mindful of that. So this multi-generational workforce, you have to look at it strategically in how you build bridges and marry up your needs for experience and teaching with those who really want to learn, but you do it in meaningful ways for both of them.
That's interesting. I think you're right. I mean, it seems like I get confused on which generation is which, but Gen Z, it does feel like they're willing to do it. The money means less to them. The principle of it means more, right? So when I came into healthcare, physicians would die in the chair. They wanted as much overtime, call, weekend, like they wanted to work, where it seems like the younger generations of healthcare professionals coming in, they want that 36 hours a week so they can go do stuff with their friends. They can live the lives their, friend who's a consultant at Salesforce can have. They're not interested in this kind of, make money at all costs, no matter what. I don't get to see my family or do anything fun ever, but I made a lot of money. That seems to be not really the case anymore. So that's just an interesting. So how do we, because of that, so it just seems like we're maybe not the Gen Z. We're getting a lot out of them. We're getting a lot of new things out of them, but there's a gap there, right? So if we've got these nurses working, tons and tons of hours, and the new nurses are coming in, they're not interested in that. How do we fill that gap? There's not enough nurses coming out. Those nurses aren't working the type of hours the other nurses and doctors are working. How do we meld that together to make something that is sustainable going forward? Because we're all getting older, and it seems like we're getting older at a pace faster than any of us can actually believe.
There's two things to that. The first is going to sound highly counterintuitive, and the other is pretty in vogue, and I think everybody's hopping on the bandwagon. And the first that's counterintuitive, the more flexibility and autonomy that you can give a workforce in the way that they work and the way that they build their schedules, and the more governance that you can give them. That's going back to what health systems do wrong. Not having a really defined governance structure around some of these workforce models and engaging multiple, different perspectives in how they're built, how they're maintained. Because sometimes if you do it in a way that it adds to the administrative burden, or it's one more thing to track, those are all things that then it becomes throw the baby out with the bathwater type, programs. So I think that's, one thing is that you have to look at it from that perspective of, making sure that you do it in ways and cultivate work-life balance that's meaningful to your workforce. So you can go and put out all kinds of programs, and I think that's what healthcare systems have historically done. At least, when I worked bedside, there was a per diem 1, 2, 3, pick. If you want to be a per diem nurse or want to work flexible, we'll let you be flexible, but you don't get benefits, and you've either got to hit this mark, or this mark from a commitment level, and we'll pay you certain amounts depending on how many hours you commit to. I mean, okay, that works, and there's still a lot of organizations that do that, and that's fine. But, being able to make it more of a spectrum and a scale and start to play with this idea of the more agility you give the organization and where you're willing to go, where you're willing to flex. Are you willing to, train in a couple of different specialties so that if I don't need you in, the ER today because, the volumes are lower, I don't want to send you home, but maybe do they need help over in, PACU or pre-op and kind of send you over there because you're skilled to do that. Or, if from, the ICU perspective, same thing with PACU. Or, there's, one of the best times I ever had in my career as a bedside nurse was when we were building a transplant program, and we didn't have a transplant coordinator. And so I was a CVICU nurse, and we worked an arrangement with the clinic, the outpatient clinic, and I did 12-hour shifts a week in the CVICU, and then I did 2 8-hour shifts up in the clinic, helping our CT surgeon from a post-op perspective, seeing those patients walk in, that had come out to me with an open chest sometimes, walk in and say hello to me after they've had a heart transplant. That was the most fulfilling part of my career. I think building those differences and experiences that fill the cup of the nurse, that's important. So that's sort of the one that's counterintuitive, and people are like, nah, doing more of those types of things, even if it's incremental and starting small and simple, that's the thing to do. The second thing, you got to use technology. You gotta get really good at looking at your workforce trends and data. You got to do it as close to real time as possible. And you've got to get good at not just looking at what has happened historically, but you've got to get good at predicting what you think is going to happen based on your historical trends. And, filling models and using AI and scheduling solutions that feed your AI models, the trends and the propensities of your workforce. Because, when I say, it's easy for me to sit here and say, let people schedule when they want and they'll schedule more for you. The simple truth is, well, what if you have lulls and periods where they don't?
Yeah.
And you still have to take care. You still have to run a hospital. You still have to take care of, your patients. So, by leveraging some of these tools that are out there and pulling AI into the conversation and looking at your predictive analytics, getting down to the things like, when I worked at Wellstar, one of the things that we did is every year we sat down and said, okay, what events are going on in the city of Atlanta that are going to impact our healthcare organizations potentially from a volume perspective? We looked at things through the lens of, like right now, and I'm thinking more future than retrospective, but, in I think 2 years, the FIFA World Cup is coming to Atlanta. Healthcare organizations in Atlanta right now need to be thinking about the volume of patients and what that's going to do to their ERs. So, that kind of thought process, and how do you just look at the big events, the big ticket events that are happening in your areas, because your ER is your front door. Yeah. So, those types of things are the things that, there's a lot of cool technology out there, and there's a lot of, organizations like ours, little plug for HWL, that can help you think about things differently that way.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I've been traveling, going to a few conferences recently, and one of the common refrains is, well, we're not using that much right now. And my retort to that is, great, perfect time to get started, because it's one of those things where let's get it going now. It's easy to get started, and then when you need it, you have it. So we're not caught off guard by it. That's just, it feels like that's a good lead in to, I guess, maybe my last question. I don't know. We'll see how we feel after this one, but I think it's a long answer, a good conversation. Healthcare, as I've known it, because I've 20 years in healthcare and various different things, healthcare is super reactive, not as proactive. How do we change that? How do we make it so that we are thinking in the proactive? Because contrary to what you said, and I'm not saying what you said is wrong, but the way I see it these days, it feels like there's a little bit of a exhaustion with staffing, where people are saying, We just spent 5 years dealing with staffing every single day of every single hour of every single, whatever. And now they're just like, we can get by with what we got to get, and we're not going to think about it. Maybe that's not 100% true, but there feels like there's maybe this exhaustion around that. But it's one of those things where we just don't have the ability to be exhausted by it. Like, and I'm using the royal healthcare we here, have to be proactive about staffing all the time. We're up against so much that it just seems like proactive is the only way you can live. And you don't have no one has the ability to just sit back and wait for the next pandemic or the next World Cup or the next major thing that's going to happen. Get ready so you don't, or stay ready so you don't have to get ready, right? That's the motto that I try to tell my kids to live by. But any thoughts on that, or kind of where do you see that? Because from a proactive standpoint, it just seems like it's really hard for healthcare to stay proactive on a lot of things. There's just so many competing priorities.
I think that the root cause of that, Tommy, is just the simply put, and this is going to be an oversimplified, I think, answer, but the healthcare industry is perhaps one of the most volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous industries that I've ever seen.
I don't think anybody fights you on that one.
What's that?
I don't think anybody fights you on that one.
And I think that, and here's the thing. I mean, if you think about all of the things that are in flux from, government policy around healthcare, the, payers and, the rising cost, payer reductions, the rising cost of providing care, inflation. I think I read somewhere that, the overall cost of providing care over the last 5 years has increased something like 25%. Over the last 5 years, Medicare has consistently cut reimbursements for healthcare organizations. Mm-hmm. So I think that, while, things have sort of died down from the pandemic, it's hard to become proactive when you are still, the hits keep coming. and so I think that's the part, and every healthcare organization is in a different, position, in what they're equipped to do, what their, financial situation looks like, where they're coming from in terms of their culture and their environment of work, what they're having to deal with. Are they union? Are they not union? We could sit here and do like 2 or 3 series of podcasts just on all of the different volatility and the different types of environments that go on within a healthcare organization. Yeah. So I say all that to say that, speaking for my colleagues that I've worked with for many, many years, I see a lot of advancement in thought. And I've seen healthcare organizations that go from being, they're focused on just the next shift from a staffing perspective. Mm-hmm. That and a lot of organizations exist in that. What do I need to get through the next shift? And you still need to do that. Every healthcare organization needs a level and a role and a certain engine that powers what happens the next shift, because that's how you get through it. But then you need another level of thought process and thought leadership on not just the next shift, but what happens next week, and then next month, and then from there what happens next quarter and next year. And I think that all of those, that the hard part, and most organizations have that to a certain extent, the hard part is creating synergy and agreement between those different lenses. And right. I still think that goes back to the governance structure and having open and honest, conversations around it. And by governance structure, I mean like an internal one, like sit down with your people, make it part of your, from nursing, we're big on shared governance. It's part of the magnet model. Sit down and talk to folks and build, advisory councils that are populated with, nurses. As a nurse, we always used to joke, the 2 things you don't mess with when you're talking to a nurse is their money and their time. Staffing and scheduling, by definition, is their money and their time. And if you don't include them in that conversation, then you're always going to have places and spaces where you're not quite hitting the mark.
Yeah.
And then you have to react to that in addition to all of the external factors. So I think that, there's a lot of things in healthcare that healthcare organizations don't have control over right now. So my advice would be control the things you can control. And that is the conversation with your workforce. Have one. And this is a hard conversation to have because, the first time you have it, if you're not having it often, is you get all the stuff. It all comes at you. And your propensity as a leader is like, well, I don't want to do that again because, that just kind of totally trashed my day. But you know what? If you keep showing up and you keep listening every single day, it means something to the front line when you do. And they know that you're going to be there with them, even if you can't really fix it in the moment. They're gonna respect you for that, and they're gonna be more apt to listen when you tell them as a leader, there's not much I can do about this right now, but we can work on it together. I think that's the part of this that we as partners in the industry have to keep in mind is that it's a really easy thing, especially coming to this side of the industry. I think the perspective I can bring the most is when you're on the outside looking in, things can look very simple and be very, very obvious. But what's going on underneath the surface sometimes, oh man, it just, the stories we could sit here and I could tell you. So I think that's where we have to, as partners, gain a whole different level of understanding of and appreciation for what healthcare organizations go through every day. And we sometimes need to bring the proactivity to them. And help them with that, if they're willing to let us.
Yeah. It's funny listening to you talking, just hearing in my head that the word that keeps coming back to me is inclusion, right? It just feels like if we're talking about governance and partnership and, having them be proctors and things like that, like that's just finding new and better ways to include people in the decision. It seems like healthcare can be very siloed at times, right? There's a decision being made up here for people but they don't understand how it affects people down here. And so that's really, I think, where I come to it is just including people in the conversation, because there's lots of different opinions out there, but there's lots of experience out there that can tell the story. So that's where my mind kind of goes when I have to synthesize information, is that inclusion for the nurse side of things. With the little time we have left, what kind of tools, resources, like what should healthcare hospitals be looking at to kind of help with this? And it doesn't have to be HWL. Like that's great if it is, but it certainly doesn't have to be HWL. There are other tools out there that they can be using or thinking about. Anything top of mind for you these days?
Yeah, I think that, to your point, it's the things that, you mentioned something about like, everybody's kind of in a lull and they're sort of over it. And can we just take a break from this conversation for just a minute and breathe? I think that I agree with you wholeheartedly. The time to start building internal contingent workforce and start strategizing for how you shift into some of these more flexible models that could help build that resilience, another buzzword, so to speak, in your workforce. It is that you start when you don't need it. The best time to start having conversations, building those structures, and looking at how you implement this is when you don't need it. Because eventually, everything in this industry tends to be pretty cyclical. And, those who fail to plan, around that, they're going to be kind of in this space where they see it happening and they're going to come to a partner like HWL and say, okay, now I need an internal resource pool. Can you stand me one up in, the next couple of weeks?
Yeah.
They can be a bit of a marathon, to get going, and especially if you're going to do it right and you're going to involve the right voices. Sometimes you have to kind of slow down to speed up. And, having the right conversations take a little bit of time. So if nothing else, just have the conversation. Understand what your workforce wants. Don't do it too far out where, things, the tide shifts and, the culture changes a bit or what the organization needs changes a bit. But start having those conversations. And in terms of tools and resources, I mean, man, I think that AONL published they had a workforce think tank. And we published, an AONL, workforce compendium. And that it's a pretty solid mandate from our professional organization as leaders. You got to have some type of a float pool. You just do. You got to be able to respond to those just-in-time needs when people call out. You've got to be able to respond to unanticipated volume, because no matter how good your predictive analytic model is, it's not going to be 100% confidence. You're going to have times where things just happen unexpectedly. Be prepared and be able to, while you're building your models and your policies and procedures and beefing those up, and how you become zero tolerance about workplace violence, build ways and means to where when it happens, that nurse doesn't have to worry about finishing their shift. You've got somebody in the hopper that can come and relieve them.
Right.
Just starting small with things like that. I think that, from our seat, being able to help with, scheduling solutions and or, technology solutions to help you manage your contingent workforce. Look for organizations that can integrate into your staffing and scheduling technology, because your administrative burden is going to go up if you're going to use technology that doesn't talk to your existing staffing and scheduling system. And look at your compensation models, and do they behaviorally incentivize the behaviors you want to see out of your workforce? If you're paying a bunch of money to a per diem nurse to drop their level of commitment to you, I mean, to me, that always seems a little counterintuitive. But, if you can build an internal resource pool where you have someone that's committed full time to you, they're still a full-time employee, and they're willing to float to different healthcare facilities in your organization shift to shift, and do it with about 2 hours notice before their shift starts, that's worth some money. Incentivize that behavior. Yeah. So I think that, my call to action to anybody is work on it now. Work with people who've done it before, and work with it. We're a technology firm by trade, and so the one thing I'll say is that if you are looking for technology, look for software and technology firms that have a nurse at the executive table, and look for healthcare or look for software and technology firms that are service-led. We all want to reduce friction, and we all want to create efficiency, and we all want to reduce overhead. But if you don't have that level of service there, you're buying technology, and that's great, and that may create efficiency for you. But have that service that goes along with it.
Yeah. Well, Amanda, I appreciate the conversation. I think I gained a little bit more knowledge than I had, for sure. And I hope that our audience did too. It was a great conversation. I appreciate you taking the time. I appreciate the 3 generations of nurses that came before you, and hopefully we can get some people excited to be nurses for the future, because we definitely need it, and it's such an important group of people that we need to be growing them and supporting them however we can. So I appreciate you, and I appreciate everything you're doing for HWL, but also for the healthcare community. So thanks for everything.
Thanks, Tommy. It was good to be here.
All right. Have a good one.
You too.